"You're too slow and careful." That's what he said to me. Not in private, not as feedback, but in front of the entire conference room. Glass walls, fake smiles, the kind of room designed to impress investors and humiliate employees without raising a voice. He stood there with his hands in his pockets like he was posing for a magazine cover, chin lifted just enough to show off the new stubble he'd started wearing, like a costume. Jason Mercer, 27, CEO's son. Fresh out of Wharton with a last name louder than his resume. He reeked of cologne and confidence, called me old guard like it was a slur, and introduced his college roommate as the firm's new legal prodigy. Said the firm needed velocity, bold pivots, and risk-positive strategy. His voice buzzed with the kind of authority you can't earn, only inherit. "You've been here what, 15 years?" he said, flipping through my file like it was a brochure. 12 blocked lawsuits, 1 SEC bullet dodged. That's great, but we're not building a bunker anymore. We're building rockets. And rockets need speed. I didn't say anything. I just looked at him, that part he didn't like. So he added the last nail, like he was doing me a favor. "I can hire someone half your age to do the same job for half the cost, twice as fast." He smiled. And that's when I knew I was done. My name is Martin Keene. I'm 51 years old. Until this morning, I was senior legal risk advisor at a tech conglomerate called Ravel Dynamics, a Fortune 200 darling, specializing in high-speed financial AI tools. For the past decade and a half, I've kept the wolves at bay, sealed the cracks, and made sure every signature that left my desk wouldn't come back in the form of a subpoena. I wasn't flashy, never had to be. My job wasn't to look good. It was to keep the company out of headlines. 15 years, no leaks, no scandals, no settlements. I packed my briefcase the way I always did, left to right, file by file, pen clipped inside the folder spine, a worn leather binder snapped shut. No one said a word. Not Jason. Not his frat buddy. Not the interns who suddenly found their shoes very interesting. I walked past the glass doors, past the reception desk, past the framed awards I ghost wrote the applications for. The doors hissed shut behind me, like the company exhaling relief. They thought they'd cleaned house. They didn't know the house still had a foundation, one I'd poured, brick by brick, document by document, over a decade and a half. See, Jason thought speed was the prize. But in legal work, speed is just a nice way to say, "We didn't check." He wanted shortcuts. I left him the full map. Because here's the thing. When you spend 15 years embedding risk protections, you stop thinking of them as defense mechanisms. They become architecture, permanent, forgotten. Until someone tears the wrong piece out thinking it's ornamental. He'd fired me like I was an accessory, dead weight, just another legacy cog in his bright new machine. He didn't realize that every contract I touched had my prints on it. Not for vanity, for integrity. He didn't see the triggers, the subclauses, the coded escalation paths buried deep in digital frameworks labeled as compliance redundancies. Because that's what I told them they were. Redundant. Jason didn't ask what would happen if those clauses were mishandled. He didn't ask what would activate if certain protections were stripped. He didn't ask who had final read access to the contract templates archived under Tier 3 legal workflows. He didn't ask because he thought I was slow. And I was. Deliberately. The elevator ride down to the parking level was silent. No music. Just the soft hum of descent. I didn't check my phone. Didn't call anyone. Just stared at my reflection in the chrome paneling, watching the corners of my mouth twitch once. Almost a smile. Not quite. 3 days later, Jason Mercer would get a letter. then another, then a federal notice. And he'd finally understand that slow and careful wasn't a flaw. It was a countdown. My apartment doesn't look like much. Clean, quiet, exactly the way I like it. No framed degrees on the wall, no photos on the mantle. Just a laptop on a walnut desk, a lamp with a warm bulb, and a drawer with 3 encrypted flash drives I never mentioned in HR paperwork. I never took work home. That's what I told them. What I meant was, I never took originals, but I mirrored everything. Not because I was paranoid, because I was thorough. Every contract, every clause, every internal memo, with legal implications, had a checksum and a backup. Company policy under Mercer's father allowed it, encouraged it even. When you're handling high-liability documents, redundancy isn't overkill. It's insurance. And now, it was leverage. After I walked out of Revell Dynamics, I didn't sit around licking wounds. I opened a fresh document window and titled it Mercer Failsafe. Just a name, just a folder, just in case. Then I started checking. I wasn't looking for blood. I was looking for fingerprints, tampering, alterations, gaps in what I'd built. It didn't take long. The new hire, Jason's frat buddy, head of legal velocity, or whatever buzzword he stapled to his title, had gone live within 48 hours. No transitional period, no onboarding. Just a mass email to the firm from Jason titled, "The Future Starts Now," and a LinkedIn post that read, "Old legal structures slow companies down. We're cutting the tape. Velocity is the new safety." Velocity. They liked that word. Fast sounded reckless. Speed sounded cheap. Velocity? That had marketing polish, enough to make the boardroom feel like they were making bold visionary moves instead of gutting their only line of defense. A week later, he hosted a public webinar. I watched from my couch, coffee in one hand, stylus in the other. He clicked through slides of revised contract templates, boasted about eliminating compliance redundancies, and said, with a straight face, that the old legal team had been risk-averse to the point of fear. I actually laughed at that. Fear is healthy. Fear is the difference between a smart contract and a class action lawsuit. Fear is why I added Clause 43.7b to the supplier chain agreements 5 years ago, shielding Revell from downstream liability in the event of offshore environmental violations, especially in regions with flexible enforcement. Clause 43.7b wasn't in the new template, just gone. No replacement, no mitigation language, not even a placeholder. I paused, then opened the mirror copy from my drive and ran a diff scan, line by line. The results glowed red. 15 key clauses missing across 8 document templates. 7 active regulatory flags, triggered simply by removing auto-reporting conditions we'd hardwired into vendor onboarding. And 4 NDAS, already signed and filed, now technically in breach because someone replaced the signature section with a shortened agreement tick box field. Valid for internal HR maybe, but not under federal labor law. Sloppy, dangerous. But the most important part? Predictable. This wasn't sabotage. This was what happens when confidence outpaces competence. Jason wanted faster. What he got was someone who saw legal work as a delay instead of a design. He thought law was tape. I knew it was scaffolding. And now, they were dismantling it, one beam at a time, without ever checking the weight above. I didn't make a call. Didn't send an email. I just watched. Let them rush. Let them celebrate. Let them feed the algorithm, chasing likes and market buzz, while the bones cracked underneath. The best part of traps isn't when they snap shut. It's when the prey walks into them thinking it's found a shortcut. I opened a new note on my screen. T-14 days to audit window. Failsafe intact. No interference yet. Then I leaned back, let the silence settle over the room, and watched the noose pull tighter. They were weaving it themselves. I just made sure the rope was quality checked. They never changed the credentials. That was the first mistake. The new IT lead, some kid with a GitHub portfolio and a sleeve of tattoos he called his firewall, forgot to revoke legacy access. Probably thought I'd been pushed into obscurity, boxed up with the other relics from the Mercer regime change. But when you spend 15 years threading compliance logic through the marrow of a company, you don't just vanish when your badge stops working. You become part of the architecture, embedded, ghost-coded. So I logged in. Not through the front door. Through an old sandbox environment I'd built during the last security audit. One Jason's father approved when we found a data leak coming through a vendor app. It was supposed to be temporary. Like most things in corporate life, it became permanent through neglect. Now, it was mine. A back window nobody thought to board up. The server was still warm. Activity logs humming, emails flowing, contracts getting tagged and versioned in the legal management system I helped build from scratch. I ghosted through the folders like muscle memory. No scraping, no downloads, just eyes. And then I saw it. A string of emails between Jason and an executive group from a fintech company out of Shenzhen. Subject line: Joint Acceleration Strategy, Q4 close. First I blinked. Then I traced the domain, cross-referenced it with a Treasury Department bulletin I'd flagged 6 months before my exit. Red list, entity tied to high-risk offshore data laundering. No FCPA review. No third-party legal diligence. Just fast-tracked calendar invites and a boilerplate term sheet so thin it would have cracked under a sneeze. It wasn't just careless. It was suicidal. Buried in that term sheet was a clause Jason had clearly skimmed, if he read it at all. Language that handed over partial oversight of Ravel's financial tools in exchange for access to Chinese consumer datasets. Full analytics integration, real-time usage logs, behavioral mapping, and Jason signed it, digitally, from his phone, in an airport lounge based on the metadata. What he didn't know, what no one in that boardroom knew, was that I'd buried a clause 5 years earlier in our international vendor framework. Clause 72.3.1-B. Any Ravel executive engaging in merger-level coordination with flagged foreign entities without DOJ-cleared vetting triggers an automatic legal review alert to our federal compliance partners. It was hidden in Appendix G, page 17. It wasn't a trap. It was a parachute, and they'd just yanked the cord mid-flight. I didn't waste time with drama. I didn't gloat. I just pulled up my contact list and scrolled until I found a name I hadn't seen in 4 years. Amelia Rourke, former compliance auditor. Now head of a private watchdog agency that consults with, among others, the Department of Justice. I didn't email her directly. I sent a secured, anonymous data drop. Just facts, logs, screenshots, time-stamped contract edits, comparison sheets showing the removal of mandatory legal review steps. The kind of documentation that doesn't need a narrative, just light. 3 days later, Ravel received a quiet ping from the DOJ. Not a raid, not a subpoena, just an informal inquiry. A paper flicker, the kind that doesn't get reported to shareholders, yet, but sends boardrooms scrambling. Jason didn't panic. Not outwardly. He even posted another quote about agility in action on his profile, alongside a blurry photo of him shaking hands with the fintech's COO. But I knew. I could see it in the access logs, Late-night contract reviews, red-lined edits flying back and forth, 2 legal interns reassigned to damage control threads. His frat buddy removed his title from the company website, and I smiled. Because it had started. Not a fire. Not a collapse. A slow, sinking bend in the beams. One that no one hears until the ceiling caves in. 3 attorneys who left last year, the ones who took voluntary packages when Jason came on board, reached out in a private group chat we used to use for quiet check-ins. One message from Angela, the sharpest of them all. You warned them. We all did. Let it fall. And I will. But not yet. Because the best failures don't crash. They unravel, thread by thread, quietly, while everyone's still clapping. It started with the sound of a laugh, clipped, smug, and too loud for the size of the room. The video was 32 seconds long, grainy but clear enough to show Jason Mercer leaning back in a leather chair during an internal Zoom call, drink in hand, collar open, sleeves rolled. The room behind him was a high-rise suite, the skyline of Singapore blinking like a nervous system out the window. You know what I told the board? He said, lifting the glass toward the camera. I said, why are we paying that fossil Keen to babysit contracts when we've got AI that can write NDAs in 6 seconds? Cut the old guy, save 6 figures. Simple math. He laughed again. That was the clip that hit Twitter first. No context, just a quote, a face, and a name. But context arrived fast. 2 hours later, a second video surfaced, this one longer. Different call, different speaker. Jason's frat brother, their freshly minted head of legal velocity, speaking candidly to a group of junior execs during a team training. I don't even look at the compliance logs, he said. That's legacy thinking. Dead weight. Compliance is just a formality for people who want to slow things down. We're here to move. No one in the room challenged him. Someone just recorded it. And no, I didn't leak those videos. But I know who did. There's a kind of quiet loyalty that forms between professionals who've survived the same storm. The kind that doesn't get broadcast. No hashtags, no Slack threads, just a folder passed hand to hand, name to name, until it finds the right eyes. Once the videos went viral, everything else followed like a tide snapping loose. 3 class action lawsuits were filed within 5 days. One from a group of former employees let go during Jason's efficiency restructure, who alleged wrongful termination tied directly to compliance bypasses. One from a regional vendor whose payment was withheld after they refused to sign a stripped-down contract template. And one from a consumer protection group targeting data sharing policies buried in the fintech merger docs. The fourth hit harder, an international cease and desist from a German data security firm, one I'd personally worked with during Revel's European expansion. They'd flagged a breach 2 years ago, and I'd added a mutual indemnity clause to their agreement to protect both sides if integration got messy. That clause had been removed, and now they were demanding immediate withdrawal from the partnership, citing breach of contract and reputational harm. I didn't need to check the source code to know what had happened. Jason's legal wunderkind had probably skimmed the document, decided it was too restrictive, and replaced it with a sanitized, one-size-fits-all agreement, built more for speed than precision. They thought legal work was a bottleneck. They forgot it was also a firewall. Then the media caught up. CEO's son ignores legal protocols, sparks, DOJ probe, and class action storm. The headline flashed across every finance site within hours. One journalist even pulled my name from a buried footnote in a dismissed court filing and wrote a profile piece. The man Revel shouldn't have fired. I didn't respond to the interview request. Didn't correct a thing. Jason vanished from social media. His Instagram, once a gallery of rooftop cocktails and product launch selfies, went dark. His frat buddy scrubbed his LinkedIn and deleted his blog posts. The board issued a statement filled with words like oversight and realignment and learning opportunity. I read it twice. Then I closed the window. That afternoon, I sat at a corner table in a small cafe near the financial district. No one noticed me. Just a man with a cup of coffee and a folded newspaper he never opened. The muted TV above the counter played a financial news segment about Ravel's stock dip. Footage of the leaked video played again in a loop. I took a sip, let it sit on my tongue. No smile, no gloating, just breath. The wind-up was done. Now came the hammer. The room wasn't dramatic. No mahogany walls, no towering bench, no slamming gavels. Arbitration isn't about spectacle. It's about procedure, quiet pressure, precision over performance. 3 chairs, a table, a stack of sealed binders waiting to bleed, fluorescent lighting that buzzed faintly, like a secret trying not to speak. I took my seat without shaking a single hand. Across from me sat 2 attorneys in matching navy suits, one older, one trying not to look nervous. They introduced themselves with names I didn't bother remembering. This wasn't about them. It wasn't even really about me. It was about what they buried, and what I buried deeper. My severance agreement was 27 pages long. Buried on page 23, in a section nobody ever reads, unless they're desperate, was one clause I'd inserted during renegotiation 3 years ago, back when Mercer Sr. still thought I'd be with the company until retirement. It read, "Termination without cause is subject to arbitration if the employee can demonstrate bad faith or reputational harm resulting from internal decision-making." Mercer signed it himself. Now that clause sat on the table like a lit fuse. I wasn't asking for money. I wasn't asking for reinstatement. I asked for one thing: discovery. The arbitrator raised an eyebrow when he read it aloud, then looked to the opposing counsel. "You want what exactly?" "Access to internal communications from the last 6 months regarding restructuring, legal transitions, and contract template revisions, inclusive of executive Slack, email threads, and internal memos." He nodded once, turned to them. "Do you contest the validity of the clause?" They didn't. They tried to delay, asked for additional review time, cited confidentiality and privilege. The arbitrator shook his head. "Clause stands. Discovery granted." Just like that, the floodgates opened. First came the emails, Jason's, his frat buddies, and a dozen others. Threads mocking regulatory process. Screenshots of redlined contracts stripped for speed. A note from Jason to the new legal lead: "We need to bury the old risk language." It's dead weight. Then came the memos. Internal notices from legal interns warning about unvetted changes. One even quoted me directly from an old compliance manual. Shortcuts in law become long roads to court. They ignored it. The final nail came from Slack, a private channel titled #Fastlane, where Jason bragged about shaving weeks off compliance timelines by skipping the dinosaur protocols. He even posted a photo of my old office, empty and lit from the hallway, with a caption: "Should have cleared this out sooner. Ghosts don't move revenue." That room erupted in silence. They say corporate shame doesn't have a sound. They're wrong. It's the absence of rebuttal, the shifting of eyes, the tapping of pens when no one wants to be the first to speak. When the board saw the documents, they didn't call a meeting. They called a vote. Mercer Sr. was forced to resign, quietly, under the excuse of health prioritization. Jason's contract was terminated effective immediately. No severance, no golden parachute. He was removed from every partner listing and blacklisted from 3 top-tier firms before the week was over. Their legal prodigy, facing a formal disbarment review after the state bar, received full documentation of his malpractice. Turns out, compliance is just a formality, doesn't hold up well under legal oath. The merger died, flatlined overnight when the fintech group's legal counsel pulled out under breach of due diligence. Revel Dynamics lost 2 major investors. Stock dropped 19% in 48 hours. And me? My name was cleared. Not elevated, not praised, just restored. Which was all I ever wanted. No press conference, no article this time. Just a handshake from the arbitrator, a stamped ruling, and a hallway that smelled faintly of printer ink and victory. They fired me for being too slow. I was never slow. I was just waiting.